this is a whistle-stop tour. If you want to talk to anybody about any of the things that come up during this training, then you can email us at advice@hubcymruafrica.org. I know most of you already know this, but I'll put it in the chat so that you can access it later. And remember that this is a 2-part course, so the next one is again at 10 o'clock on the 22nd of February. So please do attend both sessions. If you can't, please let me know so that we can help you with the recording afterwards. I know that this is a fundraising strategy discussion, so we're unlikely to have challenging conversations, but I want to remind everybody that this isn't a safe space, it's a brave space. That means that we're very open to challenge and discussion, but people's lived experiences are not up for debate. If as facilitators we see any kind of prejudice, racism, anything that we disagree with, we will remove you from the session, and we can talk about it afterwards. Okay. Alrighty, over to you, Vic. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm just going to skip through a couple of these housekeeping slides. So, hi everyone. My name is Vic Hancock-Bell, and I'm representing the FSI today and delivering this fundraising strategy session. My background is very much in small international development charities. I came into this sector as a volunteer. After I'd finished university, I was a volunteer and a founding member of a small international development charity working in Kenya for around 10 years. And I've since done my master's in NGO management and worked with other small international development charities, both as a trustee and a member of staff. And I'm very passionate about the work that small charities do. I established a Facebook support group for small charities to share learning and knowledge and frustrations and support one another. And I'm very passionate about building the capacity of small organizations and also making connections for people who work in small charities to be able to share expertise among peers. So I'm really excited to be talking you through some fundraising strategy things today. So in a minute, we'll launch a poll so we can get a sense of where you are with your fundraising strategy. We're going to be covering today what the purpose of a fundraising strategy is, where it fits in with your organizational strategy. We're going to go through the key elements of a fundraising strategy and what you need to be considering. We're going to review your current position and look at some real options for income streams. And then, as Kath mentioned, we've got a second session on the 22nd. We'll be developing the strategy further. We'll be going to take a look at a real life work plan. And we'll talk a bit about what it means to actually implement your strategy, including how to monitor income and track income and how to review your progress. And then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. So where I would like to get to at the end of the 2 sessions is that you have a decent draft of a real fundraising strategy. So we want this to be a really practical session, and we want you to actually go away with something written down that you can take back to your wider team and hopefully has got you fairly far along your journey in creating your strategy. So I think most people have now introduced themselves in the chat. If you haven't already, just take a moment to introduce yourself. Let us know who you are, your charity, what you're hoping to get from today. And perhaps, Kath, if you could launch the poll now, we'll just get a sense of where we're at with our journeys on fundraising strategy. So if you could just take a moment when the poll pops up. I can't see it, so, oh, there we go. Yeah, I was going to say someone might need to report back on the...
No, sorry, because we did the practice earlier, it was saying, do you want to share the results? Oh, no, that's not what I want to do.
Okay, so most people here are starting from scratch. don't currently have a fundraising strategy. Some of you do have fundraising strategies, and some of you have one, but it needs a little refresh. So hopefully this will be a useful session for you wherever you're at in that journey. But as Cass said, if you have specific queries, if you feel like you need to take a particular area further with your learning, then there's lots of support available to you. And throughout this document, there'll be some links. I know you've got a PDF of the slides, but we'll be able to send you the clickable links as well. Okay, so we'll get started. I'm going to turn my video off because I find looking at myself a bit distracting, and I'm going to be looking at my notes as well. There we go. Okay, so we'll get started then by thinking about the big picture and how your fundraising strategy fits into the rest of your organization and why we actually need one. So we need a fundraising strategy to actually identify how we're going to secure the resources that we need to do what it is that we're going to do. We need to know key actions and where we might need extra capacity. So we need to know, for example, if we're looking to bring in a lot of money through trusts and foundations and we don't currently have that expertise represented in our organization, that we may need to bring in perhaps a volunteer at first, an expert trustee, or possibly when funds allow a paid member of staff or a freelance support person. We want to be able to answer key internal and external questions about sustainability. So our fundraising strategy, as we'll touch on later, needs to be broad enough to enable us to not be reliant on one income stream. We need to keep our investment in fundraising balanced with the future needs of the charity. So it might be that some years there is quite heavy investment in fundraising, knowing that it's going to set the organization up sustainably going forward. Some years there might be very little investment in fundraising. We want to be able to give confidence to everybody involved in fundraising. So people need to feel confident in the organization. They need to feel confident in knowing what the charity is asking for to be able to be involved with fundraising. So you might find that you have people on your board of trustees or people who don't feel like a natural fundraiser. And this often happens in small organizations where the founding person or the founding members are very much the ideas people, the sort of visionaries, the idealists, the ones who are coming up with the work. And sometimes a fundraising skill set doesn't naturally fit in to those people's skill sets. And I think one of the things that I've certainly learned through doing this for the last 10 or 15 years or so is that it can be a good idea to identify where you're most comfortable with fundraising. And if there's a particular type of fundraising that you really don't want to do, it may be sensible for you and your organization just to not do it. And we'll touch on that later. So how does fundraising strategy fit in to the rest of your organization? Quite often I find when I do pieces of consulting with smaller organizations, and certainly this is how I've done it myself in the past before I've kind of further developed my knowledge of fundraising, is that an organization might try to start its thinking on strategy with a fundraising strategy. It's the thing that drives everything. And you can really run into some problems doing it in that way. So there's obviously a link between the activities that your organization is doing, its charitable purpose, and the kind of money that you're going to need to raise to support that and the kind of fundraising that you're going to do. But it's really important to have a very clear strategy, an organizational strategy, before we start to think about fundraising strategy. So if you are unclear about what the charity really does, its mission, its vision, its values, what the key objectives are for the organization in the next few years, it's going to make it really difficult for you to fundraise. The clearer you are with what your organization does, and the more cohesive those thoughts are for you and your team and your trustees, the easier your fundraising will be. So it's sort of a false economy to spend a lot of sort of team time on creating a really amazing fundraising strategy if you don't have those building blocks of your organizational strategy and your core purpose and your strategic objectives already in place. So your completed fundraising strategy, it can be used as a standalone document or maybe a one-off project. It could be appended to your strategic plan, but it is not a substitute for a strategic plan or a business plan. It is the first step to having an effective way to bring in money, but it needs to be in line with your charity's overall strategic plan and strategic goals. So when it comes to actually developing your strategy, there really isn't a sort of right or wrong way. And I know it can be frustrating not to be presented with a pro forma template and sort of that would obviously be ideal if we could go through and there was a series of questions and we answered them. And obviously we will go through what typically would be included in a strategy. But the most important thing, I think, is that it actually works for your organization. If you are the kind of organization that benefits from a very long, very detailed sort of strategic plan document with lots of context and lots of narrative, then that's what you should do for your organization. If that sort of stuff sends you to sleep and you can't think of anything worse than writing a 20-page strategic document, then don't do it that way. Just do it in whichever way works for you. If you want 5 or 6 bullet points with financial targets assigned to them after having done this thinking work, if that's what you want to come up with as your final document and it's stuck on your wall next to you to remind you to keep coming back to it, then that's fine. The most important thing is that it actually works as an active and living document for your organization. And what we really don't want to do is to spend 2 days on this for it to just be a document that is filed somewhere and then isn't really used. So we want to be building on any fundraising methods that you've tried that seem to have been successful in the past. We want to look at perhaps why they've been successful. Was it a fluke? Were they successful because there was a particular opportunity that can't be replicated, or was it because of a particular skill set represented in the organization? We want to look at where the greatest opportunity is to deliver income in the future. We'll need to consider who our donors are, how we interact with people. What is our style of interaction? How do we want our donors to see us as the person, the personality of our organization? One of the examples that I always like to use here is if you think of 2 organizations that do very, very similar work. Let's take Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth as an example. When you think of Greenpeace, what personality comes to mind? What kind of traits come to mind? Maybe you could just drop those in the chat, and perhaps Kath or Emma, you could just read a couple out, as it's a bit tricky for me to access the chat. But when you think of Greenpeace, what comes to mind?
Alison saying activists.
Yeah.
Campaigners, boats.
Yeah.
Advocacy and public campaigns.
And what about personality traits that you might assign to Greenpeace? If they
internally recognized, passionate of their cause, internally recognized, not middle of the road, strong.
Yeah, absolutely. And so now let's think about Friends of the Earth. What comes to mind when you think of Friends of the Earth in terms of their personality of the organization, the tone?
So we've got passionate, principles, friendly, credibility, more encompassing, family orientated, peaceful, strategic.
Yeah. So both of those organizations are trying to do the same thing, but they've got very, very different personalities. They are definitely on different ends of the spectrum when it comes to how they're trying to raise money, how they're trying to raise awareness. So it's worth thinking for your own organization, what is the personality of our organisation? Do we want to be attracting a particular type of donor? In which case, what should our personality, tone of voice, our approach to fundraising and marketing and communications be? So we'll want to look at opportunities for learning and growth as well in our fundraising strategy. So as we touched on just a minute ago, kind of what's worked well, and is there opportunity for us to grow that aspect of our fundraising? And what went really badly wrong, or what didn't really work? And did it not work because it's never going to work? Or did it not work because perhaps there was something that we should have done that we didn't, or we didn't really fully make the use of all the opportunities kind of available to us? If we were to invest in it more, if we were to do it differently, is there more potential for us? So we're going to have a bit of breakout discussion now, and I'd be really interested for you to share in your breakout groups some thoughts on these questions. So hopefully you have in your mind some ballpark figures for how much your organisation needs to raise and what that money needs to be spent on. So when we're looking at a fundraising strategy and income targets, as I touched on a couple of slides ago, ideally this would be informed by your organisational strategic plan and your organisational budget, which should then go on to inform your fundraising strategy and your budget. So when we break out into these groups in a moment, let's think about how much money you need to raise and how much of that money is for ongoing projects, committed spend that you know absolutely month on month we need to pay for this project. Anything that is a wish list project, you know, you've really wanted to start an after school club at one of your partner schools, or you really want to expand one of your current programs further into the community. Do you have any capacity building and core cost needs on the horizon? Do you know that you really need to bring in an additional member of staff at your partner organisation, for example, or you really think that actually you need an admin assistant here in the UK? And finally, are there any capital needs? Are any of your projects in need of any capital spend? So what that tends to mean is building costs, for example. So let's say that one of your projects is a vocational training centre. It's currently operating from a bit of a ramshackle setup, and it needs a fully purpose-built building to improve the facilities for learners. Those are the kind of categories that it would be helpful for us to break the income down into. Once we've had that chat, I want you to think also about the other considerations. So do we need to be reducing reliance on one funder, for example? If you've got a corporate or a major donor or a current foundation that has got a multi-year grant, are you overly reliant on one of those? And do we need to be thinking about ways to become less reliant? Do we need to plan further ahead in terms of our income? How can we move away from that year-to-year, hand-to-mouth situation? And how can we increase unrestricted income or reserves? So Kath and Emma, if we could get groups of about 4 people, and we're going to do this for about 15 minutes, perhaps if the 3 of us could be in one of the groups each. I'm not sure practically how to actually assign us to the breakout groups, but I think we might be able to hop between if we're hosting.
Yeah, no worries. I'll just swing everybody in now, just making sure there's one of us in each room.
I think when we break out, we won't be seeing these questions, so I'll copy them into the chat.
Oh, I've just done that, Sarah. Vic, I've just done it. I've just put it in the chat.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
So yeah, we're going to go into breakout room. You'll have a little pop-up that says join room, and you just click on that.
Okay, so I hope you all enjoyed your breakout sessions. And we've got a little bit of a thinking little bit of thinking time and a little bit of a starting point here on kind of some real life figures. So, and a really interesting thing that came up in my breakout room was that this can be quite an easy exercise if you're an established organization with established programs and you know what you're doing in any given year, and that it's similar year on year. But if you're at the start of your organization's life cycle and you don't have a number of years worth of program work and fundraising under your belt, it can feel a little bit like plucking a figure out of thin air. So it can be quite tricky. And so I think what's important to recognize is that this is very much a living document. You don't need to write a figure down at the beginning of the year for your fundraising strategy, setting yourself a target that feels not real, and then hold yourself to that for the rest of the year. It can be flexible. Ideally, we would want to get to the point in a more established organization where you know what your organization's budget is year on year. You create your fundraising targets off the back of that, and you have kind of goalposts that are pretty stuck, and you know what you're working to without too much variation. But when you're starting out as a new organization, I think it's important to be flexible and to have as much of an idea as possible of what you want to be bringing in. But if you set yourself a target that is clearly becoming not realistic, not to beat yourself up if you're not getting anywhere near that, and just to be responsive to the real life kind of situation that you're in, rather than picking an arbitrary number that doesn't really feel real. Fundraising is about data in many ways. It's about looking at the evidence of what has previously come in to help you identify or to help you predict what's going to come in next year. So when you don't have a track record, it can be a bit more difficult to pick those numbers. Okay, so we're going to have a start. We're going to start now thinking about the beginnings of your strategic plan. So the thinking that you need to have for your fundraising strategy. We need to start mapping out our current funding sources. So depending on how your brain works, if you want to grab a pen and paper, or make a bullet point list, or I don't think they call them brainstorms now, a bubble diagram or whatever it is. Let's start to write down or think about who your current funding sources are. Where is your money currently coming from? Is it coming from a handful of individuals? Is it coming from a grant? Does it come from one major donor, a company? Just start to write down where your money currently comes from. And also just reflecting as you do that on whether it is a bit volatile. Are you over-reliant on one or two of these? Maybe you could circle or put an asterisk next to the ones that have historically been the best performing. We're going to look at the next slide on how you might compare performance against some sort of standard benchmarks. And again, that can be a bit more difficult in a smaller organization, but it can be useful to have those in mind. Look at where your fundraising skills are in your organization. You might not have someone who would consider themselves a professional fundraiser, but have you got someone who just loves talking to people and who feels really comfortable in those interpersonal type of situations? Someone who would love nothing more than to go for a coffee and chew someone's ear off about the work of your organization. On the other hand, have you got people in your organization who can think of nothing worse than having to pick up the phone and speak to someone? In which case, would they be more suited to doing a grant application? Have you got somebody who writes really emotively and really eloquently that could be put to task in supporting grant applications? Have you got somebody who is particularly well networked, who could perhaps not necessarily do the fundraising themselves, but introduce you to people who could be helpful for the organization? What's worked really well in the past and what hasn't? Has there been any key learning? that you need to take forward into this fundraising strategy of yours? Okay, and we'll start to think about the SWOT analysis more thoroughly in a moment, but just looking at your strengths and weaknesses as with fundraising in mind. What are the strengths of the organization? Have you got a really clear story? If someone comes to you and says, so what does your organization do? Do you feel confident that you can explain that in a sentence? I think it took me about 5 years to get it down from a 5-minute conversation to a sentence. And it's hugely helped my ability to fundraise for the organization when we were able to do that. But it did take a while to get there, and it took a number of big strategic level discussions to be able to whittle it down to that elevator pitch. So we'll look a little bit at benchmarking, although, as I said, this is the sector at large. So if we look at the return on investment for different kinds of fundraising, basically, how much money can we generate for each £1 that we spend on fundraising? You see this question a lot in grant applications. I kind of hate this question because I don't think it's a true reflection of how organizations work. I don't know if any of you saw the news yesterday or were on Twitter, and there's this awful debate at the minute about the chief executive of Cancer Research UK getting a measly £240,000 a year for raising something like 15 million, or no, even more than that. And you compare that to the chief executive of, let's say, AstraZeneca, who is generating a much higher income. So although it is useful from looking at how to spend your time on fundraising to look at these benchmarks and to look at kind of, for how many hours of my time am I going to get the most return, I don't like to get too fixated on the financial return on investment. There might be an organization that for the first 5 years of its life has to spend 20 or 30% or 40% of its income on raising money to be able then to be set up to be sustainable. If the organization, as a result of doing that investment, creates amazing impact and sets itself up with a sustainable legacy for the next 20 years, that's money well spent as far as I'm concerned. And I certainly don't shy away from organizations spending money to make more money. There is a really excellent TED Talk on this topic, if you are so inclined, by a guy called Dan Pallotta. Maybe Kath or Emma, you could do a quick Google. It's called The Way We Think About Charity is Dead Wrong. And it's a really fascinating and inspiring TED Talk that really shifted the way that I think on this topic a few years ago, if you fancy watching something over a cuppa later. So my little crusade on overhead spend aside, we'll move on to thinking about benchmarking and return on investment. So you can see that trusts and foundations is pretty good for return on investment. Usually you spend a few hours or perhaps a day, maybe longer for a really big application on the work, but the return financially is usually very good. So you might spend a day applying for an application that is worth £10,000 or £20,000. On the other end of the scale, if we look down to special events or local fundraising, you see that that can be a huge resource drain in terms of somebody's time, and it can perhaps not raise very much money. There is so much more to this than just the the sort of split of percentage spend. So we're going to come on to think more about this in a minute, but it's just useful to have in the back of your mind as you go through your fundraising strategy. And, you know, if you're not a paid member of staff at your organization, you might not think of your time as having a cost associated to it. But if you are a small team, if you are a single person working on the income, then, you know, spending several days on something that is likely to bring in £500 versus spending several days on something that could potentially bring in £50,000 is just something to keep in mind. This is quite outdated, this the figures here, but the trends and the kind of the sector benchmarking has remained much the same since then. You'll get these slides and the clickable links, but there's some useful information here on the Lark Owl website about sector benchmarking and looking at kind of predictable return on investment if you wanted to factor that into your fundraising strategy. So we'll have a look at another aspect of your fundraising strategy now. So we thought a little bit internally there about our strengths and weaknesses, what kind of people we have within our team. And now we'll think a bit about our external review, so our competitor analysis. And I don't think competitor is really the right word here. I think I probably prefer to use peer analysis. And I think what we're really amazing at in the small charity sector is helping each other and sharing our knowledge with each other and collaborating. And what I see so much of in the Facebook group that I'm a member of is small charities really freely offering advice and guidance and helping each other. But it is useful to look at who else is working in the same space as your organization. Can you find a similar organization and notice what their successes are with fundraising? Can you identify from them any trends, any examples of being really innovative, any really great examples of organizations doing things and kind of really reaching for best practice? A great example of this that I've come across in my own professional life recently is I'm currently having a debate internally at my organization about the way that we communicate our stories. We work with vulnerable young people and do vocational training. I've just said it there because it's so natural to me to describe them as vulnerable young people, but that's exactly the kind of thing that we're trying to not do and move away from talking about the young people who work with us in that way. It's often the kind of language that we're encouraged to use in applications, and funders will quite often specify that they're looking to support vulnerable or marginalized groups. But actually, that's not the nicest way to be describing these fantastic young people that we work with. So we're actually looking at the moment to change the way that we communicate about our work, perhaps not using personal stories or real photographs anymore. And so we looked to our peers in the sector and found some incredible examples of organizations, small organizations, who've taken a whole new and innovative approach to their communications. There's an organization called Embraceability, actually. We've just been looking at them recently. They've taken the approach of not using any more photographs. They're using graphic images, and they're not using real stories of individuals. They've created 4 graphic personas of a typical beneficiary, and they're going to be communicating the need for their work and the impact of their work through those 4 personas, those 4 kind of virtual personas. And I just think that is so great. And that has really inspired us to inform the way that we fundraise. And of course, you know, as international organizations in particular, we have a real responsibility not to fall into the poverty porn trap of depicting the people who we work with as desperate so that we can raise some more money. It is a really difficult line to tread with fundraising because, unfortunately, poverty porn has occurred for a reason, and that is because it usually does raise a lot of money. But we need to decide for our organisations whether that is the route that we want to go down, and whether we want to make a stand and educate our donors actually that this may be what you're used to seeing, but actually we're going to do it in a different way, and here's why. So it's really helpful to look at competitors and peers in that sense of not necessarily looking to make ourselves stand out more than them. We want to beat them. It's not necessarily about that. It's about looking at where we fit into that space, and also looking about whether there's potential for collaboration. If there's an organisation that's doing really similar work to you in a similar region, why not consider a joint application or a joint bid or a joint campaign? If you're a single member of staff or a part of a small team, just imagine having a group of people to work on a fundraising campaign with, where there were 5 or 6 of you in the room, and not just you. And so I think that's really worth thinking about. And I think as the small charity sector, we can be really flexible and innovative there in the ways that big organisations can't. So we're going to have a little exercise now. We want to be looking at what you might consider or measure in a competitor analysis or in a peer analysis. So we'll just drop ideas into the chat. I'll try and get into the chat so I can see. There we go. So if we just take a few minutes now to think about the kind of things we might want to look at or measure. Let's say we've identified an organisation that's similar to us. What do we start to look at? Do we look at their website? Do we want to make a little donation to them to see how they handle communications with donors? Do we want to pick up the phone and speak to them and say, look, we really aren't sure about the best way of fundraising for this particular program. It looks like you've been really successful. Can we have a chat? I'd love to hear some thoughts from you on that. Yeah, so check their current donor list, definitely. Really worthwhile looking at annual reports from the Charity Commission. Yeah, looking at their social media accounts, looking at their blog. The example that I just gave of Embraceability, they actually put a blog out explaining the whole process behind what they were doing. Looking at their annual report to maybe get an insight into their value for money. Do they have, on the surface, do they seem to be doing really well financially in terms of bringing in income? And then you discover actually they are paying a fundraiser. And so, okay, that could be something we might want to think about. If you're looking to actually partner with them in a joint application, looking at their ethics, is there a good fit there? Are they currently working with anyone else in the sector? Are they already doing collaboration work? Speak to them directly, build relationships, work together, definitely. I think so often in small organizations, we all are trying to do what we're doing, often in isolation, and it can feel very lonely. The Facebook group that I started a number of years ago started because I was sat at my kitchen table on my own, didn't have any colleagues, didn't have anyone to ask any questions to, didn't have anyone to complain to when something bad happened. And I think being connected is hugely valuable for smaller organizations, particularly if you are on that very steep learning curve of trying to do the work of your charity and also learn how to manage a charity. So we've got some other comments here. Look at what they are missing, look at their management structure, check that it's a not-for-profit, look at who their target group is for fundraising and see if it's similar. Look at their approaches to complaint resolution. Yeah. So I think that the crucial thing to take away from this is that we absolutely can learn from one another, and we can do that in two ways. You know, we can do behind the scenes research. We can find someone who is perhaps a few years down the line in the organizational life cycle. They are where we want to be in 2 or 3 years' time. And we can do all of that behind the scenes desk research. But the chances are, if you pick up the phone and ask them for a phone call, they will give you all of the information that you might need to know in a fraction of the time it might have taken to have done that research yourself. Of course, they might not give you the list of funders who funded them. They may be feeling generous and give you some insight into that. And you may find in their annual report that there are some examples of the funders. Sometimes you can see it from social media, lists of funders or particular campaigns that have done well. I think, as well as looking at particular organizations that seem to be a good fit in terms of a peer or a competitor, asking in a public forum as well. So asking in social media, asking on Twitter, on LinkedIn, asking in a Facebook group, you know, we're thinking of doing X fundraising activity. Could anybody give us some insight on this? Even if the organization's core work isn't necessarily aligned or similar, fundraising activities are pretty similar across the board. And so before trying to embark on something new yourself and kind of do the working out and do the trial and error piece yourself, get all of the learning before you start from other people who've already done all the trialing and erroring for you. There is no point in trying to reinvent the wheel. You want to do the big Give Christmas challenge, find out from everyone else who's already done that, what not to do, what to do, those little tidbits of insight that can make a huge difference. You want to get a case for support done for your trusts and foundations fundraising. Look at dozens of examples and use a tried and tested format. I think all too often we are all struggling to reinvent the wheel when the wheel is there and is thoroughly tested, and we just need to be in touch with each other to be able to share that among ourselves. Okay. So we're coming up to having our break at around 11:15, and we've got about 5 minutes before then. So should we just take the opportunity before we have this break to have any questions that have come up from this first section? I know that there was perhaps 1 or 2 people who joined after we'd started. So if anybody wants me to go over anything else or answer any questions about those first handful of slides, we've got a couple of minutes now before we need to break, or we can just break early if there are no questions.
Vic, whilst we're waiting for people to put questions in the chat, I just really wanted to jump on the boat quickly when you were talking about ethical fundraising. Yeah. Some people will know, but for those who don't know, we have been doing a lot of work here at Hub Cymru Africa on kind of fundraising without using poverty porn and positive messages and stuff. So I'll put a really quick, when I send the post-event information, I'll put a quick link in there for further information if anybody is interested. And as always, it's quite a complex issues really. So if you want to talk to us about it, then do feel free to get in touch with us. Okay, is there questions come yet?
Thanks, Kath.
One of the things that cropped up with us was we had an ED that wanted to be in control of all of the fundraising, saying that if members did their own, it sort of sent missed different signals, etc. But I mean, what are the views of the fact that if you have members, etc., that they should be able to fundraise so long as they're on mission, but also perhaps deciding, okay, if they fundraise, what are they fundraising for, so it doesn't take away from what the core desperately needs the money for, or whether it funnels into it.
When you talk about members, is it a membership organisation, or do you mean the people who are involved in delivering the work?
Well, ours is a membership organisation, but I think anyone that has a real interest and will volunteer to help you make things happen.
Absolutely. I can really relate to that. And I've been in similar situations where you get really enthusiastic people who kind of go off and raise money in perhaps a way that is not really aligned with your values as an organization. So in the past, I've found a way to manage that is to have your fundraising strategy and to have your ethical fundraising policy that sets out what you will and will not do to raise money. You have your specific targets, you know what you're raising money for, that's set out in your fundraising strategy. Anybody who comes into the organization and says, okay, I've got some spare time, I'm really enthusiastic about what your organization's going to try to do, and I want to help you fundraise, you sit down with that person and you establish the kind of fundraising that they want to do. Let's say they're really skilled at writing. Okay, you can support with our grant writing. Let's say that they want to do a bake sale or a book swap and it's a community type event. You agree that with them. We have at my organization volunteer agreements that set out a code of conduct for engaging with donors when you're representing the organization. It sets out things like what we would expect in terms of decorum and behavior with donors. And we would also provide them with our sort of brand guidelines or our standard case for support for the organization, so that when they're talking about the charity, they're talking about it in the way that you as an organization have agreed upon. They're not talking about it in a way that is sort of gone through their own translation filter and is coming out slightly different to the way that you might want it to be represented. It's always a bit difficult because people are people, and people will go off and do their own thing. But I think the thing there is to have all of those documents and guidelines ready to give to a person who is interested in supporting you with fundraising, so that you're not having to handhold and coach people each time they come in. You get someone who comes in, you send them, here's our fundraising strategy, here are the things we need help with at the moment, here's how we talk about ourselves at an organization level. If you're comfortable with all of this and you still want to help us, please sign this code of conduct and volunteer agreement. And hopefully you would be able to identify someone in the organization who could be there as a support for that person, but also just get a sense of whether things might be going off on a tangent. And having all of those, I think, would be helpful. Sorry, I'm just going to unmute. Could you just unmute yourself? I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Sorry, there's another element as well. We're fortunate because we have members who are governed by ethics four-way test. But I've known in the past that if you're dealing with folk who are outside of that, you might need something around the money as well to make sure that all the money raised gets through to the charity. Because I've witnessed others in the past that perhaps creamed some off. So you need to protect your brand and your name as well, so that every penny that's given gets to its destination.
Absolutely, yeah. And so hopefully, so what would be good to have in that sense to protect the money side of things is to have your finance procedures agreed with your treasurer, and to have in a very specific set of procedures and protocols for when somebody's handling cash on behalf of the organization. So let's say they're doing an online campaign, you would say to them that needs to happen via our whatever it is platform that you're using. If they're doing an event that requires them to handle cash, then preferably you would have two independent people. So the person who's running the event and another person who is sort of impartial to them, who could be the second cash handler. And you would have written down in your financial procedures the protocols for handling cash and how the money is then paid into the charity's bank account. And as long, there's only so much that we can do to prevent that type of thing from happening. But as long as your organization has got the appropriate sort of procedures and protocols written down, as long as you are taking taking the steps that you can to prevent that from happening, if it does happen, then that is really unfortunate. But if you have those written down in your policies, if you have a set of procedures, Usually when it comes to money handling, as I said, it's helpful to have at least 2 people there representing the organisation, so that it reduces the chance of that happening. But I think getting yourself set up in the background with all the right policies and procedures and documents is probably the most helpful thing that you could do, so that those sorts of things run smoothly. What's been very helpful for me in the past is actually downloading from a larger charity their fundraisers pack. Lots of charities who rely on that kind of fundraising have a downloadable pack for their external fundraisers, and you can often just download it from the internet and see what they say. And I have used those in the past to create my own documents for external fundraisers.
Do you have a favourite?
Pardon?
Do you have a favourite one that you would recommend?
Not off the top of my head, but while we're on the break, I will have a look and see if I can put some links in the chat. So we will have a break now. We will come back at 11:35. If you're back before then, feel free to come back and we can have some more questions and answers in the chat if anybody has anything that they want to ask. Otherwise, we'll have an opportunity to get a cup of tea and stretch our legs, and I'm going to go and put my head out of the front door and gulp some fresh air. Okay, I'll see you all in 15 minutes.
Hi, just really quickly for anyone who's just arrived, the reason it's very quiet is that we're having a break. We're coming back in 12 minutes. Thank you.
Kath, could I ask you a question? You're on
Yes,
mute.
who's speaking? Carol. Hi,
yes.
Carol. How are you?
Nice to see you. Just will you be putting out about all the links and everything? So I haven't written them all down. Would you be sending that to us?
Yeah, no, not
Lovely.
a problem at all, because also once we close the meeting, they all disappear, don't they? So
Yes.
what we'll do is we'll send a follow-up email and all the kind of links that have been going from the chat, and there's been some good advice in the chat that I might pull out and summarize as well. So not a problem, Carol. We'll send it in the email.
Lovely. That's brilliant. Thank you very much.
Not a problem.
Vic, could I ask you a question, please?
Yeah, of course.
What's your Facebook? I'm sure it was on there, but I'd just like to jot it down if I may.
Of course, yeah. So it has the not so catchy title of the Small International Development Charities Network.
International charity. Sorry, can you say that again? Small International
Development Charities Network.
Okay, lovely, thank you.
Yeah, if you search for that in groups on Facebook, it should come up, and we can put the link a few places as well if you have any trouble finding it.
Thank you.
No problem. I'll keep an eye out for your name. There's some questions to ask before entering, just like agreeing to the group rules and saying whether you're from a small charity and all of that, but it's easy to miss them sometimes. But I know who you are now, and I'm the person who admits members, so I'll look out for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. I'll just give everyone a minute to come back in, and then we'll get started again. There's also if you are on Facebook and you're interested in using Facebook groups to sort of connect with other people and learn, there is a really good Facebook fundraising group called Fundraising Chat. There's, I think, about 11,000 members in it. It was founded by 2 women who I think were also just keen to connect with other fundraisers and learn. So there's a real mix of people in that group, from super amazing experts and professional fundraisers to people who are starting out with fundraising and want to learn. And it's an amazing resource. You can use the search function within the group to search for keywords. So if you're looking for intel on a particular campaign, like the Big Give, for example, if you use the group search function to search for the Big Give, you can see all the previous discussions on that. If you're looking for a particular funder, there's another good, there's a couple of Facebook groups actually. Let me just remind myself of what there's one called Trust Fundraising, I think. Let me just remind myself. There's a group called International Development Trust Fundraising. That's quite a new group. I think there's about 400 members in that one. But that one is specifically for people who might be looking for advice on a particular funder, or maybe you've got a project in mind and you'd like some advice on whether anybody's aware of a funder who might be interested in that kind of thing. But these groups are my lifeline for everything. I don't do anything without running it by one of these groups first, usually. Okay, so we'll get started again. So we're going to spend a bit of time now between 11:30-ish and 12-ish on continuing kind of the groundwork for the fundraising strategy. So we're going to look at a Pestle and a Swot analysis in detail, and we're going to go into some breakout rooms again in pairs this time, and actually do the analysis for our organisation. So as I said at the beginning, hopefully at the end of these 2 mornings, you will have an almost there draft of your actual strategy. So we'll do this as a real exercise. So we'll start with looking at a Pestle analysis. So maybe teaching you to suck eggs here if you've done this sort of thing before, but a Pestle analysis is essentially looking at the external environment to your organisation. So looking at the political, economic, societal, technological, legislative and environmental elements that might affect how you fundraise. So let's just start to put some thoughts next to each of these. Is your organisation working in a field that is particularly affected by politics? The organisation that I work for operates in Kenya, and so we do have to consider how local elections and politics is going to play into our work as an organisation. And we also consider the political landscape in the UK, the economic landscape in the UK, and how that might affect our fundraising. As we know at the minute, we are having various crises, whether that is energy, cost of living, groceries, all those basic amenities, the prices are going up, and it is likely that people will have less disposable income. Obviously, as a result of COVID, people's disposable income may be on the decline. People may have been furloughed, lost their jobs. It can also be really helpful for us as international charities to take the temperature of society and its attitudes towards development. I'm sure it'll be, I'm sure you'll all be aware that there have been plenty of bad news stories about international development organisations. On the whole, I think trust in charities is pretty low in the UK as standard. Trust in international charities is even more so. People have in mind still issues like the Oxfam scandal and other safeguarding scandals that came out in the development sector very recently. So it's really important for us just to be aware of how those things going on around us can affect us. And either we decide to just keep them in mind and perhaps alter our behaviour accordingly, or we could decide to actually talk about it publicly, set ourselves apart from bigger organisations, or actually talk to our donors about how they're feeling. How are you feeling about international work? Do you feel that you can trust where your money is going? And it is up to us, I think, in a way to challenge some of those what can be quite harmful views towards international development. So it's just factoring in all of those things to your fundraising strategy and thinking about what your responses to them is going to be. Maybe you could put some of your thoughts into the chat as well, if you haven't already, to give some of your peers some insights and some ideas into what they might include in their Pestle analysis.
Vic, do you want me to do the breakout rooms now?
We're going to come on to that in a sec. We're going to do this just as a team, and then we'll do the SWOT analysis in pairs. Great.
Sorry, I misunderstood.
That's okay. So technology, when it comes to your organization's work, maybe are there technological factors that might be useful to be aware of that might change how you actually do your work? In which case, does that change how you're going to fundraise? Are there technologies available to you to make your work really innovative? And does that open you up to different kinds of funding? Looking at technology for fundraising specifically as well, I mean, there's been a lot of movement in the last year or so about fundraising platforms closing down. Virgin Money Giving closed down. There was a lot of debate internally within the sector about which platform to use going forward. It's important to be aware of all of that and how we can use technology to help us fundraise. A revelation that I kind of had, which shouldn't have really been a revelation at all. We were looking at the donation page on my charity's website, and to make a donation, it was quite long-winded. I had to fill in my name, my email address, my postal address, my phone number. I had to go through quite a lot of steps, and then I had to manually enter my card details. And if I had to do that for an online purchase, I wouldn't do it. I would get to the checkout and I would just abandon it and go somewhere else where I could do a very quick payment using Apple Pay or PayPal. And that is the level that we are at the moment in terms of people's patience for spending time online or needing things to be really easy to use. So something that we've decided to do is to make sure that we can include an option for Apple Pay, Google Pay, or PayPal on our website, so that people can come to our website, decide they want to donate, come to the donation page, and in an instant, just click something on their phone and they've given us the money. We don't want any barriers to prevent people from parting with their donation to us. So it's worthwhile looking at technology. Legislation, big example from the last few years, obviously GDPR, which really had a huge impact on the way that we were able to fundraise. I think our mailing list went from a few thousand to a few hundred. And then environment. We should all really be aware of the environmental impact of our work and how we fundraise. We should have perhaps an environmental policy that fits into how we fundraise. An example of this is a colleague of mine, someone that I know from another organisation. One of their big money earners is an earned income stream through a fundraising arm. They have volunteers going out to climb Kilimanjaro, and they have hundreds and hundreds of these volunteers going out to climb Kilimanjaro. They raise thousands and thousands of pounds between them, but environmentally, that is not ideal. And they've recognized actually that that is not responsible. They support water and sanitation projects in Kenya. They cannot be seen to be fundraising in a way that is directly in conflict with the problem that they're trying to solve in Kenya. So they've decided to move to UK-based only challenge events within 5 years, for example. So in a minute, we'll move into the breakout groups. But before we do, make sure you've got just at least one thing written down for each of those. Just to get your brain whirring. And perhaps this is something to take back to your wider team and have a bit of a brainstorming session on to see whether there are any of these external factors. Okay, so we're going to move on to looking at our SWOT analysis in total. So those external issues that we just talked about can essentially be kind of broken down into the opportunities and threats categories. What we talked about earlier on before the break in terms of our internal capacity, internal challenges can be seen as the strengths and weaknesses. So we should have a worksheet on this. If anyone's struggling to find the right worksheet, if you could just drop a message in the chat and we'll direct you to it. We're going to go into our, I think is there a worksheet, Kath, for this? I think there should be, yeah. We're going to go into our breakout sessions. We'll do it in pairs because it's quite detailed. So doing it in pairs just allows you to sort of have some quiet time doing it yourself and then maybe relay it back to your partner and perhaps ask for some feedback. Your partner hopefully can be a sort of a critical friend type of person for you in this exercise. So if we go into our breakout rooms, Kath, if that's all right. Okay, so hopefully you've got the beginnings of your SWOT analysis, which is really helpful in guiding your fundraising strategy. Obviously, there is probably one person from each organisation represented here today, so it is really important to take this back to a wider team and get their input on it as well. We're going to move on to think about potential sources of income now. So hopefully you'll feel that this is practically helpful, and we can look at each income source in turn and think about which methods are going to be best for you and your organisation. So we'll go through each one. And some of you might have tried a bit of all of these. Some of you might have tried one or two. Some of them might be completely new to you. So we'll spend a bit of time just going through all of these, and then we'll look at some case studies and we'll think about which ones would be good for you and your organisation. So grants is a really popular one for our kind of organisations, and it's popular for a number of reasons. One is that it tends to provide a pretty good return on investment. As I was touching on earlier, you can spend not that long on an application and potentially be in with a chance of securing tens of thousands of pounds. Of course, it's quite high risk, and we'll come on in a minute to look at kind of a matrix of the level of risk, the level of return on investment, the level of time that you need to put in, and the timeframes for these kinds of types of fundraising. You could submit a grant application now in February. You might not find out whether you've been successful until 6 months from now. I think the longest I've ever waited was about 18 months when I got a surprise check in the post for an application that I'd submitted 18 months ago. I think we'd actually completed the project by then. But it can be very long term. And so if you have got a project and it's happening next month and it desperately needs to be funded, trusts and foundations fundraising is probably not the one to rely on. I think it's a really valuable one to have in your mix of fundraising. And I would say at every organisation I've worked at, it's featured pretty heavily. And I think it is a really valuable one to have. If you can get into a great rhythm of submitting a few applications every week, every month, I think getting into that flow of maybe generating 20 or so % of your income through trusts and foundations can be really valuable. To set yourself up well for trusts and foundations fundraising, we go back to that inverted triangle of really having to have our organisational strategy, mission and vision very clear in our minds. Trusts and foundations fundraising tends to be much more focused on the evidence for your project, the way that you're able to articulate to funders why your work is needed, why you are uniquely placed to provide the solution, and the fact that you can show evidence that your solution is working. Depending on the funder, they'll ask for a variety of different things. Usually they are pretty hot on asking for evidence. Some may want to see very detailed budget breakdowns. Some may want to see your safeguarding policies and procedures, how you manage your monitoring and evaluation. So it's actually really important before you embark on trusts and foundations fundraising to get that kind of housekeeping undertaken before you start, because you could be writing dozens of trust fundraising applications, not getting any success and thinking, why is this not working? I'm spending loads of time on these applications. I'm not getting anywhere. And maybe it's just that the formula of your application is not quite there yet. So spending that time getting the ducks in a row for your application and then creating a really strong case for support. If you've not come across the concept of a case for support before, there's some really good training specifically on case for support and how to write one. It's basically your 2 sides of A4 wow pitch to a funder. You need to be able to, in 2 sides of A4, powerfully and succinctly pitch to a funder why they should give you money over the hundreds of other applications that they've received that day. So community and events fundraising, sort of the other end of the spectrum really, requires much less kind of preparation, I'd say, in terms of being able to provide evidence and provide the technical kind of framework around programs. You go to a community fundraising event, it's quite unlikely that someone there is going to come over to you and ask for your monitoring and evaluation framework or a copy of your safeguarding policy. So if you're starting out, if you're quite early on in your organization's life cycle and you don't have a monitoring and evaluation framework and you don't have 2 years of data to demonstrate the impact of your work, then community and events fundraising, individual giving, and so on can be the good ways to start out, because it's more informal. It's about people. It's about relationships. Trusts and foundations fundraising can often become easier and easier as the organisation grows and can gather more evidence that its approach works. Community and events can be very time consuming. You may have somebody within the organisation. It could be one of the trustees. It could be a volunteer, or maybe the founder is a particularly enigmatic character and really loves being, in groups talking about the work, in which case community fundraising and events could be really great for your organisation. You might be in the very lucky position of being quite well connected. I've come across organisations in the past where the founder has left the private sector to start a non-profit, and when they hold an event, they get all of their former colleagues in the room from the big banks in London. And so for them, events was great because the founder didn't have to work very hard at all to get a room full of people with quite a lot of money. On the other hand, if like me, you don't know anyone like that at all, there's no point in me trying to do one of those kinds of events. It would take me a huge amount of effort to get the right people in the room. The kind of time that I would spend on something like that would be very unlikely to produce a good return. So for me, it's just one that I don't do. I just know it's not the right one for me personally and my organisation. Community and fundraising events can also be really helpful in playing that longer game with fundraising. So even if you hold an event and it raises £500, actually, if you had 20 or 30 people in the room and you were able to pique the interest of those people and you now have their contact details, in that room of 20 or 30 people, there may be 1 or 2 or 5 people who remember the organisation and think, gosh, I remember that great event that I went to a few years ago. I wonder what they're doing now. Hopefully you've got their contact details. You can be sending them your email updates. You can be picking up the phone and saying, hey, we've got this great new project that's happening. I thought you might like to be updated about it. And you can take them through the journey of being somebody who's totally new to the organisation to then perhaps somebody who makes a donation to a Christmas campaign and then perhaps sets up a regular donation and then perhaps decides they want to do some fundraising for you themselves. So those community and event type of fundraising, it's not just about the money that you raise on the day. It's about trying to expand the network of your organisation and get more people in through that front door to then be taking them through the journey with other kinds of fundraising. And we'll come on to this in a bit more detail in a second. Individual giving is really the golden egg of unrestricted income. This is kind of what we're all really desperate to get. We want people to give to us regularly to manage our cash flow. If we can get someone to set up a £20 a month direct debit, and we can get, a couple of thousand people to be doing that. And I don't say that as if it's possible to do in a short space of time. My organisation's 20 years old, and I think we're still very much working on building that up. But building up your regular givers is a really safe way to sort of almost guarantee, as much as you can guarantee, that you're going to get a similar amount of money month on month, and that's going to keep you ticking over. So that's another one that I would say is pretty core. If you're not going to do all of these, I would look at regular giving, a bit of trusts and foundations. Major donors, again, if you're connected to people that you think have the potential to be a major donor, and as a small organisation, major could be anything over £500. For a large organisation, major might be donations of £1 million or more. But if someone came along and sent me a cheque for £500, I would be thinking that was quite major. So it's up to us to determine who we think are those types of major donors. Do we know anyone? Could we sit down and do some contact mapping with our trustees and say, right, does anybody know anyone who works in at this business? Does anybody know their dentist, their doctor, so-and-so whose daughter runs a business? Let's sit down and work out who we're all connected to and how we could possibly try and approach them to support the charity. Legacies are very long term, but potentially very high return. If we have got people within our donor base who we know really love the organisation, have been with the organisation for a really long time, can we work with them in a respectful way to ask them to pledge us something in their will? And will they tell us what that amount is? If you know these donors well enough, you could say, would you consider leaving us a gift in your will? They might tell you, okay, yes, I'll be leaving £5,000 to your charity in my will. It's something that could take decades to materialise. So it's certainly not something to be relying on, but definitely something to be including in your fundraising package. I think it can be quite a sensitive one, and people feel a bit scared to ask people to give money in their will. But the advice that I've been given when I've gone to training about legacy fundraising myself is to take the drip approach. You don't send a legacy email out to all the old people on your mailing list and say, can you please give us a donation in your will? You include it in everywhere. You include it on your website. You include it in your email newsletters. So people just see it combined with every other type of fundraising. Will you consider leaving us a gift in your will? Put it across your social media channels. Make people aware that that's an option. Maybe just remind them that, oh, I hadn't thought about that. Yes, maybe this is something that I'd like to do. And perhaps just ask them to let you know if that's something that they've chosen to do. So corporates, I find with corporates, my personal experience is that it's quite hard to do if you're going in cold. If you have through your network a personal connection, somebody who can get you through the front door, and there's a natural synergy between the work that your charity's doing and the work that the company's doing, then they can be really fruitful. They may start off as non-financial. So it may be that in the beginning, there's somebody or a group of people in the business who are providing pro bono support or expertise, but with enough relationship management, a year down the line, that may translate into a financial gift from the business as well. Earned income. Some charities have a trading arm, for example, that they generate income through. I mentioned earlier an example of an organisation who send people out to Kilimanjaro. That is through a trading arm, through essentially a travel agency that they set up that operates in a profit-making way. The profits are donated to the charity. It could be a charity shop. It could be some sort of profit-making social enterprise selling excuse me, selling things made by beneficiaries, for example. It could be that some of your team, excuse me, have this amazing expertise on your topic, and they will go out and do consultancy and training to other organizations that could, with the income being invested into the charity. And finally, statutory. Statutory funding is probably less relevant to us as international organizations. We are unlikely to be providing sort of service provision as a sort of replacement for government funding, but there were some pots of government funding available to international charities, but we've had quite a year in the last few years, as I'm sure you're all well aware of, in terms of our accessibility to government funds. So I'm not going to show this now, but this is a really interesting case study. This is the Kilimanjaro travel agent earned income organization. The link will be available to you to listen to at your leisure. It's about 20 minutes long, but it's really interesting. These are a fellow Sheffield-based charity. I'm in Sheffield, and their approach to generating income is unlike many other charities that I've seen, but it's been hugely successful. And I think it could be applied to other organisations if there was a similar synergy of work there. They do water and sanitation projects in Kenya. They develop most of their income through this trading arm, and it's a really fascinating read. So we're going to do a breakout session now, and then we're going to come back and do a little bit more thinking on some of the strategic considerations in fundraising. And we've got one final activity after this one before we wrap up for this morning's session. So we're going to go into groups, and we are going to take a look at a different type of fundraising each. And we want to look at the pros and cons and what kind of resources we might need to do that type of fundraising, and whether there might be any barriers to implementing that particular type of fundraising. So it might look something like this. So let's look at grants. So I'll not give anybody grants to do in your groups. So we'll look at this one as a group. So the pros can be huge chunks of money in comparison to the rest of the charity's income. The funders are in the business of giving, so they're warm, they're expecting a request for money, super high return on investment. You can involve others. You might have somebody who's a great writer, who's willing to churn out applications for you. So it's quite an easy one to outsource to other people as well. The cons are it's often restricted. So if you just want some unrestricted money to bring in a member of staff or to do some things that aren't business as usual, that's a bit tricky. Reporting requirements can be disproportionate to the amount of money that you have. The lead times can be really long, upwards of 6 months for larger funds. Resource considerations, we need to know exactly what we're asking for funding for. We need to be able to package the work very neatly into a succinct project. We need a strong case for support. We need a robust budgeting and monitoring and evaluation. There are some barriers to this. We might not know how to identify potential funders. We might not have the skills available to us at the moment for preparing a really strong written proposal. So using this type of setup, we'll go into some breakout rooms. And I think, should we go for groups of 4 again, Kath, if that's okay? And then we will, as you're setting them up, Kath, if you could just let me know how many groups there are, and I will assign some of these different income sources to the group?
So we'll have 4 groups.
Okay,
Four
so
groups will be groups of 4. If you can't, so some people aren't able to make it into the breakout rooms. If you can't, let me know so I can kind of rejig it a bit and make sure everybody's got people in the room with them.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I don't know whether you can be left in the main room if you can't get into a breakout room, so perhaps that might be an option. Don't know if that's possible. So if group 1 could take community and events, so if you get into group 1, your community and events, if you're in
do you want me to say who's in the group? Because once they go in, they don't know.
Sure, yeah.
So Carol, John, Stella and Valerie, you are group 1, which is community and events, yeah?
Yeah, so if group 2 do individual giving,
which is Sarah Simmons, Maria and Lena.
Group 3, try corporates.
So that's Alison, Callum, Precious and yourself, Vic.
Okay. And if the final group does earned income.
So that's Elizabeth, Nicola, Wendy. And then Emma, you're floating. Sorry, Emma's in room 2. No, I'm going to put Emma in room 4. Sorry.
So we're just going to have, I think we'll have just 5 minutes on this one.
Okay, great. Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Welcome back, everyone. Sorry, Callum, that you got cut off in our breakout room. We ended up in a little bit of an ethical fundraising rabbit hole because we were assigned corporate fundraising. And we touched upon, obviously, a very important element of corporate fundraising, which is how do you ensure that the values and ethics of your organization align with the values and ethics of a company? And would you accept a donation from a company if their values were not aligned with yours? It's probably not a conversation for us to get into now, given that we've got a few other bits to get onto, but I think it's really valuable and perhaps worth everyone sitting with their wider team to decide where they sit with the ethics of their fundraising and what kind of companies would be an absolute no-go for them and what kind of companies or funders they'd be willing to accept donations from. So that was really interesting. Sorry, Callum, again, that you got cut off. I hope you all had some useful discussions in your breakout groups. I'm just going to get my presentation back up. I'm really sorry if you can hear background noise. There's always some sort of DIY happening on our street and in our house. Okay, so I just want to talk about a couple of case studies. This is an organization called Azuko. They were very lucky in the first few years of their organization's life that they received support from a architecture firm to pay for their CEO's salary for about the first 3 years. So this was obviously a really amazing kind of situation to be in. They got that initial support from this architecture firm. It gave them the space they need to establish themselves. However, when that ended, they needed to find alternative sources of income. So it was perhaps serendipitous rather than strategic, this money coming from the corporate funder, from this architecture firm. It wasn't necessarily something that could be repeated year on year. So they needed to diversify. So they decided that, on paper, corporates seem like a good fit. We've had success with them in the past. They've been able to give us quite a lot of money. But in reality, that one example was a fluke. It was a bit of good luck. It's not something we can necessarily repeat. So they moved on to focusing on a combination of grants, individual and contract income. So they decided to spend time generating, getting themselves kind of up to speed with those 3 elements. They involved trustees, they involved their small staff team of 1.5 people, and they got their key supporters involved as well in assessing options. So they actually went to their donors and asked them, and went to their trustees and asked them, how do you think we should be raising money? Do you have any contacts that could help us in raising money? And I think they were lucky that one of their trustees was interested in doing some of the trusts and foundations. They found that they had a natural ability with the fundraising research and the writing of applications, and they focused on building up their individual giving and money through contract work, statutory contract work as well. And Jo, who is the founder and CEO of Azuko, has said that her advice would be that if you're not experienced in fundraising and you think there's a piece missing and you don't get it, then ask the question, access training to break down the process and give you the confidence to figure it out. And there is a huge amount of training and resources out there to help you kind of brush up on particular areas of fundraising once you've identified the ones that you want to have a go at. So we're going to finish with some strategic considerations, and then we are going to pause and reflect on this morning and come back to our next session in a couple of weeks' time. So some things just to remind you to sort of focus on when it comes to putting your fundraising strategy in wider context. Looking at return on investment, obviously, typically the higher return, the higher the risk. Legacies isn't on here, but if we look at the sector benchmarking links that I shared earlier, I think that's about sort of 25-to-1 return on investment. So a very high potential reward, but I think typically around 13% of people leave a gift in their will. So it could be huge in terms of the money that's coming in, but it's quite unlikely that you will get a legacy every year. Moving beyond this return on investment idea, we need enough money to fund our programs. We need a responsible balance of risk and reward. With that, we have our healthy fundraising program. We don't have a healthy fundraising program or a healthy fundraising mix if we are scrapping for our core costs and we are heavily reliant on one source of income. So we really need to be looking at getting that good balance and that good mix. And we want to look at time and risk when it comes to assessing the mix that we've got in our fundraising strategy. So you can see on the screen here how legacies have a very high return on investment, but could take 10 years to materialize. Grant-making trusts, for example, on the upper left quadrant, are quite high return on investment and sort of short-term in the grand scheme of things when you compare to something like a legacy. We've got company support, corporate there in the middle, major donors. So we want to be trying to get most of our income coming in through this higher return on investment, shorter timescales, but with a mix of some of the other elements coming in as well. So not to forget those ones with longer timescales or perhaps lower return on investments, but probably not to be focusing most of our energy on them. Looking at the risk as well, factoring risk in as well as timescales. If you see here, grant-making trusts, we saw in the previous image that it was quite high on return for investment and not too bad in terms of timescales, but it is quite sort of risky. You know, we work at my organization on a 1 in 10 success rate. And so you do have to submit a fair few applications to be seeing the income coming in through that. I think the sector average is about 1 in 7 or 8. During COVID, we decided to try to predict based on 1 in 10, just to be, hopefully to be pleasantly surprised if things went in the other direction. So it's just to note that it is important to consider all of these things when you're mapping out the kinds of fundraising that you want to do to get this balanced fundraising mix that takes time and return on investment and risk and reward all into consideration. So this one's sometimes got the not so friendly name of the dual bottom line analysis. I think the mission and money matrix makes a little bit more sense. The idea is to find the stars. So those that deliver both impact, so hitting on the charity's mission, but also bringing in, also sort of able to bring in income or attractive to fundraise for, i.e. hitting the money. So there'll always be things that we'll do for love. So the top left quadrant, there may be that project that you think, gosh, this is really awful to fundraise for. This is not something that is appealing to the wider public, or this is really difficult to fundraise for from trusts and foundations. But we know we're going to keep doing it because it's a heart project, not a head project. And so we will have some of those, and that's fine. And there'll also be things that we do because perhaps they are easier to package up and fundraise for. So it might not be that that delivers the most impact, but it might be that the public really understand that project. I see this a lot with capital projects. For example, it's much easier to explain to Joe Public the impact of building a classroom than it is on trying to reduce gender-based violence through community interventions. So it might be that we have this mix of fundraising where we have some projects that we're doing because we know that they're easier to translate to a public audience, and we have some that we're doing that we know we're going to have to hit those niche funders for. If there's anything in the stop box, it's not really generating any impact, or it's not really easy to fundraise for, then we would need to be seriously considering if that's the best place for us to invest any resources. So if you've got a project and you think, you know, the evidence is showing us here that it's not really hitting the mark, it's really hard to fundraise for, is that one that we need to take off our list of projects? We've got the one in the bottom right quadrant as well, which is some things, as I mentioned, that we do for easy to fundraise for, not necessarily a massive sort of impact. So ideally, we want everything that we're doing to be in the heart quadrant, in the star quadrant on the top right. I think it's fair to keep some of those heart quadrant pieces in. We want to stop some of those ones that are in that bottom left. And it's probably okay for us to keep a couple of the money makers in as well. I'm just trying to find that balance. So we've got here the donor pyramid. I touched on this earlier, and the idea is that people start out at the bottom of the pyramid. So they are friends, they're visitors, they see something written about us on social media, they come to an event. They start off and they make a one-off donation via the website. Maybe they'll make another second donation after that. They might decide that they really love the work that the charity's been doing. They're really happy with the way that they've been thanked and looked after by the organisation. And so now they've decided they're going to give £20 a month. After giving £20 a month for a few years, if they're really happy with how they've been stewarded as a donor, they're really amazed by the charity's work, they might say, do you know what, I'm going to give £500 at the Christmas appeal, or I'm going to make a big donation when I get my bonus this year or something. They might start to make regular big gifts. They might get into your major donor category, and finally they'll leave you a gift in their will. And so this would be the ideal journey for a donor that we would want to take each of the people involved in our charity through. This could be a decade-long process. It's not something that we're trying to get someone through in the space of a year, but this is the direction that we hope that we'll be able to get people through. And we'll be doing that through really managing relationships. If there's anything that I've learned about fundraising, it's that it's mostly about relationships. And if you have nobody in your organization who's comfortable picking up the phone to speak to people, find yourself a volunteer or a trustee that is comfortable picking up the phone and asking how people are and thanking them for their donation and building up that relationship with them. And that time spent will pay for itself through further support. So we've got another case study here. I might move us on from this because we are going to have a little bit of a review at the end, and I want to give us plenty of time on that, but this will be available to read kind of in your own time in your PDF printout of this. This is just the testimonial from Jess on that. Basically, the conclusion of their case study is that they realized that challenge events and special events were just not bringing them enough money for the amount of time that they were putting in. So they strategically decided to just cut that They were great for cultivation, they recognised, but it was just too resource heavy for now. And I think that's really important, just to recognise that they decided that at this moment, it's just not the right use of our resources. She decided she could write 20 grant applications in the same time that she would need to organise one gala dinner. So for the time being, they decided to shelve that. So let's have a little bit of review time now and think about the methods that you're going to focus on for your fundraising strategy. So perhaps just write down, maybe put in the chat, any that you're going to leave out and any reasons why, any that might have a question mark next to them and what those questions are that might need to be answered. And then any that you're thinking, okay, having heard all of this, I've thought about it, I think that corporates are really going to be a good one for us to look at. Or I think that trusts and foundations fundraising is something that we really need to be looking at. Thanks for coming, everyone. I hope you found it useful, and I look forward to seeing you all on the 22nd.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vic.
Okay, thanks. See you later, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.